Gelatt, it's so nice to meet you. How are you?
So I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great, thank you. Philip, look, I'm gonna start off. This is the most embarrassing part of the interview. It often feels for the participant, it often feels like when people sing you happy birthday, you just have to sit there and take it. But I'm going to go through your accolades because they're incredibly impressive. Okay, so to our readers and to our viewers, Sean O'Connor from Macabre Daily here. I've got the incredible Philip Gelatt with us. He is the director and writer of The Bleeding House, the writer of Europa Report, the writer, director, and producer of They Remain, the writer, director, and producer of Spine of Night. You wrote Gray Matter, and you wrote most of the episodes for Love, Death, and Robots, for which you won a Primetime Emmy.
True. Those are all true facts.
The first question is, why such a slacker? I mean, when are you going to get off your ass and do something, Philip?
Uh,
Unbelievable, sir. I mean, that's speaking for myself. I mean, Spine of Night was just incredible. Not that the other work isn't, but Spine of Night just really sang to me, especially the kid in me, which is going to bring me to my first question.
okay.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, just like you do with the authors on First Word on Horror. And all the authors, I've seen the first three episodes. So the authors start out with that epiphany moment. You know, what was it about horror that resonated with them? So the same question for you. What was that moment, and why wouldn't your parents let you watch The Black Cauldron?
I was going to say, I'm going to bring up the Black Cauldron. I
Yeah.
don't know. So all of the authors mostly have great epiphany moments. I mean, Stephen tells such a great story about the Cleachy Pit. I don't have a story like that, unfortunately. I have the tale of my mom not letting me see the Black Cauldron when I was however old I was, 5, which I think. I mean, I bring that story up. I mean, I think basically to say that it gave scary things the patina or the appeal of the forbidden, right? So it's like, oh, I can't see that. Well, I'm pretty curious. That being said, I was then a pretty fearful child. She might have been right not to take to take me to it because I was pretty scared of horror stuff for a long time. And then in my like early teenage years, I got really into I saw Alien and Aliens, and Evil Dead 2 was a really big moment for me. And then reading, honestly, it was probably the combination of seeing those movies and then starting to read horror fiction, which will bring us to First Word on Horror. But like I read Stephen King, obviously, but then pretty quickly moved beyond Stephen King and got really into Clive Barker and Anne Rice and H.P. Lovecraft and those sorts of things. And from that moment forward, I've always been. I mean, I read other genres as well, but like horror's always sort of been in me, so to so to speak.
Well, can I ask you, because I know that you're an NYU alumnus.
Yeah.
So being down in the village, because I went to NYU as well. Maybe you can see this is HD camera. You can see the wrinkles on my face and the gray
I mean,
hair.
mine too. What are you talking about?
Maybe we bumped into each other down the hatch or Phoebe's. But you had such varied theaters to choose from, and you also had the Strand that was just a stone's throw away. I'm just curious because that was my experience going to NYU, really dining out on such different genres and educating myself toward things that I really didn't have any knowledge of when I was growing up as a kid. Did you feel the same way?
Yes, I'll say two things about NYU. So one was I was a cinema studies major, and I think that actually probably has a lot to do with me loving like the big nerd genres now. Because as a cinema studies major, a lot of what you watch is like, and I love art film, but you watch a lot of art film. So when I was not doing that, I was like, oh, I want to watch a horror movie. Like I'm enough Godard, enough like Rossellini or what De or whatever. Like let's watch a Sam Raimi movie. So I think there was a that push and pull between the sort of arty intellectual stuff that I was getting at school and then genre stuff has a lot to do with I think how I think about genre and filmmaking in general. That being said, there was a great class that I took on Romero, Cronenberg, and Craven. I think it was. It was like a comparative directors class. It was wild. It was great.
Great.
Um, and then, yeah, I mean, so I would go then, to the same places you're talking. I mean, I remember very vividly seeing Don't Look Now for the first time at the film forum, it must have been, or seeing Pi, Aronofsky's Pi at Angelica. Like there's just a lot going on there. But all of that also is sort of what I was saying about this blend of like the sort of arty. It was like art horror was very much on the on the menu in theaters, and that
Oh yeah.
was that was great. I love that stuff.
It's so funny you say that because the friends that I had that were in cinema studies, I was in the education department, but they really had to take that coursework where it was The Bicycle Thief and it was all these fantastic films. But when they were off campus, so to speak, they were like, let's go see that, let's go see the
Yeah.
horror movies and the action movies. And it was great. It was, of course, I raised my hand. I'm coming, I'm
Yeah.
coming. Okay, so Paul Tremblay in his segment, he said something that really resonated with me, and I'm curious to see if you feel the same way. He said that don't write what you're comfortable with or what you know, but write what you're obsessed with. Do you feel that as a writer and a filmmaker? Do you lean towards that, the obsession of I've got to get this out of my system?
Yes. 100%. I think, I mean, specifically what he says is write what you know is terrible advice. And I completely agree with that because you can't, I mean, it's impossible then. Like no one would write anything. Like what I write would be so boring. Like I got up and I had oatmeal. Sorry. Like I don't live an interesting life. That being said, a lot of these authors have lived interesting lives, but I do, I completely agree with it. And I think, whatever one means by obsession, it's almost like you can define it for yourself. And so I looking at the things that I've written, even things I choose to adapt, I can, and I don't always know that I'm doing it when I'm doing it, but afterwards I'm like, oh, I know why I picked this because it has these thematic things, or it has this in it, or it has this in it. Like that's clearly these are things that are, if not in my conscious mind obsessions, they're subconsciously there are things that I mean, Paul says it too. He talks about writing about families. He says that he didn't realize he was always writing about families, and then somebody was like, "Why do you always write about families?" So, it's but I think that's great advice. Yes.
I have to ask you. Let's bring up the authors. So we've got Stephen Graham Jones, we've got Elizabeth Hand, Paul Tremblay, Laird Barron, and Mariana Enriquez. All authors that are they're so varied in their field. They have such distinct voices. I'm so curious. A, how did this all come about? What was the inception of First Word on Horror, and how did you land on these authors? They're incredible.
So it started with Laird Barron. I know you haven't seen his episode, but he's the one with the eye patch, and I've known him. They Remain is an adaptation of one of his stories, so I've known Laird for a long time, and I knew that his biography was wild in the sense that he grew up wild in Alaska and raced the Iditarod and had various intense experiences, like he'd almost died a number of times. And just before we started shooting, well, I'm sorry, I didn't know we were going to shoot yet. Laird got very, very sick a couple of years ago and almost died. And I thought that I can't let that happen without forcing Laird to get on a camera and talk to me about his life and writing and everything. So we started with him. Excuse me. So we did that interview first and cut that into a thing. I didn't know what it was going to be. It was, it's a different form than you'll see it in the series. And I was like, well, this works. Like this is interesting. I'm finding, even though I did the interview, I'm finding it interesting to watch. There are connections here between story and interview that are surprising. And so I went to my producer and was like, hey, this is great. Or actually, maybe he came to me and said, this is great. We should do more of these. I can't remember. One of us was like, we should do more of these. And then we started with writers that we already knew personally. Like I knew Stephen Graham Jones, not super well, but we'd hung out a little bit. Actually, when Spine of Night came out, I met him in person for the first time. And I knew he had an interesting life. I knew he was very thoughtful on topics of horror and etc. So we just sort of expanded from there. And so I knew before we shot, I knew Laird, Paul, and Stephen personally. I didn't know Elizabeth or Mariana. But then Paul was like, oh, you should talk to Elizabeth Hand. She's had a wild life. And so he introduced us and she agreed to do it. So it just sort of expanded organically almost, you know?
It's incredible the stories that these authors have, and like I said, I've only seen Stephen Graham Jones, Elizabeth Hand, and Paul Tremblay, but those three I can't wait for the rest. By the way, but those three, their experiences are so different, but they're also fascinating. Some are utterly heartbreaking. Some are downright frightening. I mean, Stephen Graham Jones, the way he describes his upbringing and just constantly being surrounded by violence, and you can see how that influences his work. It's almost cathartic for him to get this stuff out. I'm curious, the stories that they recite, for the documentary. Did they choose those or did you choose those? Because
Yep.
they're fascinating because they go along so well with the personal aspect that they bring to it.
So a little bit of both. The Stephen one's funny. So we thought Stephen was going to read a story of his called Father, Son, Holy Rabbit, and there's a little bit of it in the episode. You can catch it. But we got to the day that we were going to shoot with him, and I sorry, let me bring you behind the scenes. So I'd been talking to Paul about how we were going to shoot with Stephen, and I was like, I don't know what story Stephen should read. And Paul said, Stephen loves the story Father, Son, Holy Rabbit. Have him read that. So we get to Stephen's house. I'm like, oh, we're gonna have you read Father, Son, Holy Rabbit. Is that okay? And he's like, man, everybody, like, I can't remember what exactly. He's like, I don't know. Like, I know everybody loves that story, but I don't know. And I was like, oh shit. Like, I picked a bad one. And then I was like, well, so what, what would you read? And he brought up Your Final Girls as a thing that he brought up, I think, because he's read it at conventions and it kills at conventions. So I was like, okay, great.
Yeah,
So we had him read both. The other ones, all of the other ones we chose, uh, we would ask the authors if there's something that they want, and invariably they each of them was like, oh, you pick whatever. We had Paul read two. Paul read a story called The Party, and also the one that's in the episode, The Teacher. But when you see the Paul episode, I mean, you've seen it, or when other people see it, the teacher just goes so much better with Paul's whole thing that we went with the teacher instead. So
it's great. I have to commend you. If we were You've been into horror for ages. I've been into horror for ages. Let's We'll be transparent. If this documentary were taking place during the 80s, it would be wall to wall middle-aged white guys and Anne Rice. you know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's I love everything about First Word on Horror because it's it's a varied field, it's inclusive, there are different voices there that you wouldn't have seen or heard decades past. So you get this richness to the documentary that I think people are going to enjoy immensely. And I don't want I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but it's kind of important. I feel like it's important to have those voices and those authors represented. So I just wanted to commend you. That was less of a
Thank you.
question and more of a well done.
No, yeah, thank you. I mean, I can talk about that if you'd like. I mean,
I
it is
would love it. Yeah.
it's part of the design of the series. Honestly, was both sort of, we call it racial, ethnic diversity, but also sort of gender diversity and socioeconomic diversity too, which is all sort of on display there. And it's all to say, really, that a horror horror's for everybody. You can come from
Yeah.
whatever. We've all got scary stories to tell. But then also, to sort of examine that idea and pick it apart a little bit and say, like that look at these individuals, they all come from different places, and ask that question, like, where does the work come from? Like, what about this individual? What about their circumstances? Like, how does that, do you see it directly reflected in the work? Do you see it reflected as if through like a strange mirror or something? Anyways, like those questions really are sort of almost at the heart of the series, from my perspective.
Well, like I said, I just want to commend you because it's so refreshing to see that, and it's not to say that other avenues aren't representing that, but this is great that we're getting a documentary that really shines a spotlight on such distinct, unique voices. Now let's concentrate on you. Now we'll put you in the hot seat for a little bit. The way you film this documentary is incredible. I love the framing, the lighting, the choice of the choice of supplemental material to visually accompany the short stories. They're different. They all work perfectly well. I don't want to spoil anything for the viewer. You have to go see First Word on Horror. It is waiting for you. Trust me, you're all going to enjoy it, especially the Macabre Daily fans. They're certainly going to enjoy it. But what was it about the visual style? Was it the short stories that influenced what you were choosing? How did you come about choosing the unique visual styles?
So some of them we chose, ahead of time. So the Elizabeth Hand one that has some animation in it, I was like, oh, we should do this. We should do animation for this one. The exact style of animation evolved. There's actually sort of two and a half styles of animation in that one. That evolved, but the idea was, okay, let's do one animated. Um, the Steven one. which has live action stuff that we shot, that was very much like, well, if you're gonna read a slasher story, you should go shoot some slasher stuff.
It's so good, Philip.
Thank you, thank you.
So good.
Um, the Paul one, well, I guess sorry, I don't want to go through all of them. I'll just answer by way of saying it, some of them were found after the fact. Some of them I was like, here's the story. I have no clue how or what the visuals are going to be, and then it was a sort of, and that's kind of exciting because it's like the world's your oyster. Go, let's go figure it out. And some of them were pre-planned, so it's a little bit of a mix of both. But the idea that there would be differing visual pieces to each episode was always part of the idea, like to keep it varied and interesting and unique for each one.
Like I said, I don't want to spoil anything for the viewer. But I will say the Paul Tremblay, what you chose for that is so pitch perfect. I just got such a kick out of it, and it made watching it so enjoyable because it just works so well together. They all do, but when I hit Paul's today, I watched it before our interview, and
Nice.
I was like, "Oh, come on now, this is too perfect." Okay, so I know we're getting close to our time. I'll start wrapping it up, but I did want to ask you. Okay, we have the five authors. I don't want to put any pressure on you, but there are so many authors out there. Are there future plans to continue this as a series?
Yes, I mean, I desperately want to, for selfish reasons, just because I love talking to writers. Yeah, I mean, there's so many writers that we thought about trying to get for the first season that we couldn't. So it's almost like we, oh, it's a bad thing to say. We almost arbitrarily capped it at five just because we're like, okay, let's finish these, let's get it out there, let's see people respond to it, and if people respond to it, then we'll spin up production again and go and do more. So yeah, I mean, well, I'm not going to name any of the authors that I want to get. Let's just say there's a ton of them. There's
Okay,
a ton
good.
of other authors that I would like to talk to. Yeah, yeah,
I think choosing five was a great number because you get to spend a good amount of time with the authors and really get a sense, especially when they're talking about their personal experience, whether it be happy, sad, traumatic, you really get a sense of who they are. There are great documentaries out there that have horror authors in them and they're talking about their experiences, but typically it's about a dozen. So you get a little bit of a snippet and then you're on to the next one. And it's like a tease because you're like, oh, we were just about to get to the good stuff.
yeah.
That's what I love about First Word on Horror because you settle in and you're there with them. I mean, you're a captive audience in the best way possible, but you really do leave each episode with a good sense of who these people are, how they came to be obsessed with horror and then create these incredible tapestries of nightmares, you know, for lack of a better phrase, but it's so true. And I just think it's so fulfilling, especially for a fan. It's just so fulfilling. So, with that said, I'm so happy to hear that there's going to be, fingers crossed, future installments. But here I get to put you on the spot one last time.
Okay, I'm
All
ready.
right, Philip, what do you have planned for the future that aside from First Word on Horror, what can we look forward to?
Oh, I've got a bunch of things. So I write video games too. I'm finishing a video game for Frictional that makes the Amnesia series. That will be out hopefully in 2026. I can't say exactly when, but hopefully soon.
Okay.
I'm writing on an Amazon show called Secret Level that's like adaptations of video games. And then I'm working on a series that will be put out in the same way as First Round Horror that will come out at the end of the year. That is a horror series that I will not say anything else about, except that if you like First Round Horror, I think you will also love this other thing. So go watch First Round Horror, and then we'll send you advertisements about this next thing. So
Fantastic. Fantastic. And just before I go, it's 2025, beginning of a new year. Is there anything that you're looking forward to, either books or movies, that are on your radar for 2025 that you could recommend?
oh my God, I'm not ready for this question. I I'll say this, that nothing. I'm sure there are things that I should be excited about that are coming out, but they're going to leave my mind. I will say this: I have on my shelf, my to read shelf, my physical to read shelf, a bunch of. Sorry, this sort of answers a question that I said I wasn't going to answer. A bunch of books by an author named M. John Harrison that are sort of horror, sci-fi. I've loved him for forever, and this year I'm going to finally read everything that he's written. So I'm excited to get to my M. John Harrison list.
Your TBR is beckoning. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
familiar with that. Oh, good stuff. Philip, I can't thank you enough. On behalf of all the readers and viewers of Macabre Daily, they're incredibly excited about you and what you do for the genre, and just keep it up.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you.
This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Take care.